so that kita boleh gunakan untuk revision lah nanti. Okay, now let's go to the slide. Okay, so can everybody see my slide here? Boleh?
Boleh.
Okay, alright, thank you. Alright, now return on invested capital and profitability analysis, chapter 8. Okay, so first of all, let's look at the preview of this chapter. So what are the subcomponents that fall under this chapter? So they have 4 pillars there. The first one, I will touch on the importance of return on invested capital. Okay, the second point will be on the components of a return on invested capital. So we will look at I think about 2 components there. Okay, net operating asset and common equity. And then we will go to the first component of return on invested capital, which is a net operating asset, where we're analyzing the return on operating asset, okay, as well as the segregation part. All right, and then the final component here will be analyzing the return on common equity. Okay, so this will be the third topic which involve calculation lah. Okay, the first topic adalah topik evaluation of performance, the one that you cover on your own and you are doing it right now in your assignment. Okay, the second topic that involve with a huge amount of calculation is your cash flow analysis, and then this is the final one. Yang ketiga, topik number 3 yang involve with calculation. Okay, which is chapter 8, return on invested capital and profitability analysis. Okay, now without further ado, let's go to the first slide. Okay, so return on invested capital. Now let's look at page 461 there on the first line. So financial statements analysis involves assessing both risk and return. So return on invested capital refers to a company's earnings relative to both the level and source of financing. So it is a measure of company success in using financing to generate profits. So this is one of the most important ratio that always been used by the business analyst or the external user in order to study the performance, the overall performance of the organizations. Okay, so besides looking at the liquidity ratio, what else? Efficiency ratios, apa lagi macam-macam ratios kan ada kan, right? And then this is will fall under, I think this one will fall under profitability. Okay, so one of the most important ratios, okay, which is ROI ataupun return on invested capital. Okay, right. Now let's go to page 462 on the importance of a return on invested capital. The next page. So we can analyze company performance in several ways. Revenue, net income, and asset growth are performance measures in common use. Yet none of these measures individually are useful as a comprehensive measure of company performance. So we want to find the most relevant ratios that can cover comprehensively in terms of the performance of the organization. Maksudnya keseluruhannya lah. Kalau kita tengok kepada revenue, is focus on the revenue sahaja. Profit in terms of profit sahaja, or asset in terms of asset utilization sahaja. Tapi kita nak tengok secara keseluruhannya macam mana. So they will focus on return on invested capital. Okay, now analysis of company performance demands joint analysis, where we assess one measures relative to another. So the relation between income invested capital, referred to as return on invested capital, or ROIC, or return on investment, is probably the most widely recognized measure of company performance. So like I see, so this is the one ratios that cover all of the ratios that you had learned before. Okay, secara keseluruhannya kita akan tengok ROI. Tapi kalau you want to be specific on the liquidity or specific on the market ratios or the efficiency ratio, then you will go to the specific ratios lah. But for ROI, they will focus on the overall performance. Okay, so it allows us to compare companies on their success with invested capital, because you want to know whether the management, the board of directors, whether to fully utilize its investment, okay, its capital in order to generate income, to generate return for the sake of the shareholders. Okay, so kita nak tahu, you dah ada, I think you are already aware that we have two type of investment kan. Kita ada debt instrument and then equity instrument. Right, so these are the capital that you have invested in your organization. So we want to know whether the management team able to use the sources of capital wisely, efficiently or not, whether in order to generate income for the organization. Okay, so that will be the kata mukadimahnya lah untuk you punya return on invested capital. Okay, now let's go to the next slide. Okay, so it's about ROI relation. Now let's go to the next line there. So it allows us to compare companies on their success in invested capital. It also allows us to assess the company's return relative to its capital investment risk and compare the return on invested capital to returns of alternative investment. Government treasury bonds reflect a minimum return due to their low risk. Riskier investments are expected to yield higher return. Analysis of return on invested capital compares the company's income or other performance measures to the company's level and source of financing. So it determines a company's ability to succeed, to attract financing, to repay creditors, and to reward owners. So these are the relationship of ROI with the performance of the organization. So why people are focusing on ROI in order to study the performance of the organization. So these are what I shared to you before. Okay, ini adalah dia punya kegunaan adalah the relationship to the income, to the performance, to the company's level, to the source of financing, and in fact, this ratio also allows you to compare with alternative investment opportunities. Okay, and in fact, we can identify the impacts of the company's ability in terms of to succeed in the next future in order to attract new financing portfolio, to repay creditors, and to reward owners in terms of paying the dividends. So all of them you can get, or you can make a decision from looking at the ROI of the organization. Okay, now let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this will be the application of ROI. So ROI is applicable in order to measure the managerial effectiveness, to measure the profitability, as well as to measure for planning and control. Okay, so daripada ROI relation tadi, the previous slide, so they come with the three main applications of ROI. So first of all, in terms of to measure the managerial effectiveness, maksudnya kita nak tahulah whether the management teams are effective or not. Okay, are doing their job or not, as simple as that. Okay, now let's look at the first one. In terms of measuring managerial effectiveness. So the level of return on invested capital depends primarily on skill, resourcefulness, ingenuity, and motivation of the management. So management is responsible for the company's business activities. So it makes financing, investing, and operating activities and operating decisions. So it selects actions, plans strategies, and execute the plans. So return on invested capital, especially when computed over intervals of a year or longer, is a relevant measure of the company's managerial effectiveness. So you're able to study whether the board of directors are doing their job wisely or in a very high level or not. So kalau ROI itu is not in good condition, meaning to say something wrong sorry, with your management team. Okay, mungkin ada masalah dari segi tak cukup bagus, dari segi tidak cukup pandai nak menguruskan capital of the organization, or maybe memang ada problem dari segi disiplin and so on. Okay, so ROI can be used in order to measure the management team, the performance of the management team, because the performance of the organization is the reflective mirror of the management team. So kalau management team tu bagus, then organization pun, dia punya performance pun akan ikut bagus lah. Tapi kalau management teamnya pun masuk air, tu company tu pun anytime can be wind up. Okay, so that will be the first application of ROI. Now let's go to the second part. Okay, measuring profitability. So return on invested capital is an important indicator of a company's long-term financial strength. It uses a key summary measures from both the income statement item and the balance sheet item to assess the profitability. So this profitability measure has several advantages over other long-term measures of financial strength or solvency that rely on only balance sheet items such as debt to equity ratio. So it can effectively convey the return on invested capital from varying perspectives of different financing contributors such as creditors and shareholders. So beside measuring the managerial effectiveness, ROI also can be used in terms of measure the profitability. Yes, we have the GP margin, we have the net profit margin. Okay, fine. But if you want to look at overall performance, then you can use ROI in terms of to measure the company's profitability as a whole. Okay, so that will be the relationship lah. Right? So some users or some business analysts, dia tak tengok pada profit margin sahaja, dia lebih pada profitability. Ada yang tengok profitability saja, might be not good enough lah, just looking at the net profit margin or GP margin. So if they want more, then dia akan pergi beyond than that, which is ROI ataupun return on invested capital. Okay, so that will be the second application of ROI. Now let's go to the final part in terms of measuring for planning and control. So ROI can assist managers with planning, budgeting, coordinating activities, evaluating opportunities, and control. Now let's look at the explanation there. So return on invested capital serves an important role in planning, budgeting, coordinating, evaluating, and controlling the business activities. This return is composed of the return achieved by the company segments or division. So this segment returns are also made up of the returns achieved by individual product lines, projects, and other components. So a well-managed company exercises control over returns achieved by each of its profit centers and rewards its managers on this result. So in evaluating investing alternatives, management assesses performance relative to expected the returns. So out of this assessment comes strategic decision and action plans for the company. So dia macam satu KPI lah. Kita boleh katakan ROI ni adalah satu KPI, target dia. So in order to achieve certain target, okay, organization must come up with a strategy, with the planning. Okay, so come up with the planning will be the budgeting system. Okay, the cost system in order to execute the plan. And then there might be certain activities to be coordinated with. In order to achieve the plan tadi, okay, dia punya strategi tadi, what are the strategic planning, okay, so what are the activities in order to reach your target. Next, evaluating any opportunities that appear or that exist within the implementation of the activities. And in fact, you must also have controlling system in ensure that all your support system, all your staff, okay, executing the activities as per planned by the top management level. So, semua itu dikawal oleh ROI inilah. In order to achieve that certain ROI, so benda itu semua terlibat. Okay, so that will be the three application of the importance of ROI. First, measuring managerial effectiveness. Two, measuring profitability. And just now, I already explained in terms of measuring for planning and control. Okay, so do you have any questions so far? Ada soalan nak tanya? Is it okay? Can I proceed?
Proceed.
Okay. Yes. All right. Okay, good. Now, let's proceed to the next slide. Okay, now let's go to the components of ROI. Okay, you can refer to page 463 down there. Okay, now let's look. So analyzing company performance using return on invested capital is conceptually sound and appealing. So return on invested capital is computed as follows. So income divide with the invested capital. So simple je lah sebenarnya dia punya calculation dia ni. Right, so income, which is your net profit, divide with your invested capital or cost of investment. Then you get your ROI. Okay, for example, as you can see in the picture here, so net profit 2.35 billion over 32 billion of cost of investment, then the ROI will be 7.34%. Okay, so itu dia punya kata root method dia lah. Okay, root formula dia, original formulanya. Okay, but dia ada sedikit isu kat sini lah. If you go to the second line there, or the third line there, so there is, however, not complete agreement on the computation of either the numerator or denominator in this relation. So these differences are valid and stem from the diverse perspective of financial statement users. Therefore, we'll go to the next section. Is according to the book. This section describes these differences and explains how different computations are relevant to different users or analysis. Okay, maksudnya apa? Maksudnya formula yang dia bagi tadi tu terlalu general, terlalu umum. It's not specific to certain user. So macam mana solution yang bagus untuk still we can calculate our ROI but sesuai untuk different perspective. Okay, diverse, itu sebab dia kata tadi tu, stem from the diverse perspective for financial statement users. As we know, we have plenty of financial statement users. So formula yang kita ada tadi terlalu general. Okay, so kita akan tengok kepada yang lebih khusus lagi. Okay, so the alternative measures of invested capital. Now, let's go to the next page. So how can you calculate your invested capital? So they have alternative measure. So the two common measures are net operating asset and stockholders equity. Okay, so kita akan cover both of these common measure. So the first one will be net operating asset. Now, go to the first line in page 464 there. So there is no universal measure of invested capital from which to compute rate of return. The different measure of invested capital used reflect users' different perspective. So in this section, we describe two different measures of invested capital and explain their relevance to different users and interpretations. So number one will be your net operating asset ataupun NOA. So many analysts segregate the balance sheet and income statements into operating and non-operating components. Ini kita dah belajar sebelum ni in chapter, I think chapter 6. Kan, recurring and non-recurring, operating and non-operating activity. So samalah, cuma yang ini dia berkaitan dengan aset. Okay. So many analysts segregate the balance sheet and income statements into operating and non-operating components and compute a return on net operating asset ataupun RNOA as the summary measure of the performance. So this passing of financial statements into operating and non-operating components follow from the view that operating activities are the most long-lasting and relevant for the determination of the stock price. So that is why wujudnya return on net operating asset ini. Okay, so operating activities are the core activities of the company. They include all the activities necessary to bring a company's product or service to market and to service its customer needs. So if you go to the next line tu, dia bagi tahu lah all the operating activities and non-operating activities. Dia bagi contoh. I think that one you can read on your own. Okay, right. Go to the next paragraph. Start with our approach tu. So our approach is to analyze a company along this operating or non-operating dimension with the return on net operating asset or RNOE as the summary measure of performance. So RNOE, which we more fully explore below, is defined as net operating income after tax divided by average net operating asset. Okay, so that will be the formula. Okay, net operating income after tax ataupun NOPAT and OPAT divided by average NOA. Okay, average net operating asset. Ada formula dia tadi. Okay, the next slide. Okay, kita tengok. Alright. So more specifically, operating asset consists of total asset less financial assets such as investment in marketable securities. So operating liabilities consists of total liabilities less interest-bearing debt. So operating asset less operating liabilities will yield the net operating asset. So kat situ dia beritahu macam mana you nak calculate you punya NOE. So what do you mean by NOE? Sebab dia punya formula tadi kan RNOE equals to NOPAT divided by NOA. So how can you calculate your NOE? So NOA will be the operating asset less your operating liabilities. Okay. I think we can have the formula here. Okay. So this will be the formula of RNOE. NOPAT or NOPAT, right? Divided with the operating asset or minus operating liabilities. Okay. Ataupun dia bagi kat sini beginning NOE plus ending NOE divided by 2. So dapatlah you punya average net operating asset. Alright, so you kena calculate dululah of beginning and then ending, and then campurkan dia divide by 2, then you akan dapat you punya net operating asset. Okay, now that will be the explanation on the formula. In fact, down there you have the explanation there. So the appropriate income measure to compare with the net operating asset is net operating income after tax, which equals revenue less operating expenses such as cost of goods sold. I think that one is selling and advertising expenses and taxes. And then return of the asset also for selected companies are provided in the margin graphic. Oh, kita tengok kat sebelah tadi lah. The next page tu. Okay, kita tengok pada common equity pula. Oh, sorry. Okay, so this is for common equity capital. The next page. So return on common equity or ROCE is defined as net income less preferred dividends divided by average common equity. So common equity is equal to total shareholders equity less preferred stock. So that is how you calculate your average common equity lah. Okay, kena tolakkan you punya preference share dulu. So preferred stock is excluded from the computation since from the viewpoint of common shareholders, preferred stock has a fixed claim to the net asset and cash flow of the company, just like that. So that is why kita kena deduct dulu preferred stock, okay, in order to calculate your common equity capital. Next, common equity capital can be alternatively be defined as equity to total asset less debt and preferred stock. So the proportion of debt and equity financing of asset is a capital structure decisions that each company must make. Okay, so this will be the explanation down there. Bawah tu semua dah ada explanation in term of common equity capital. Okay, cuma part on the second, third point tu, computing invested capital for the period and then adjustment to invested capital and income and so on, yang itu you boleh skip lah. That one tak payah sentuh. Okay. Okay, go straight away to page 466 under return on net operating asset. So ni yang saya tunjuk tadi lah, formula ROE just now. So return on net operating asset is computed as follows. So net operating profit after tax divide with the average net operating asset. So the denominator of the equation, net operating asset, is equal to operating asset less operating liability. Inilah. Okay, your net operating asset here is equivalent to your operating OA less OL, operating asset minus operating liabilities for both beginning and ending. Nanti you campurkan, then you divide by 2. So operating assets, so what are the component under operating asset? Now let's go to the next line. So operating assets and liabilities are those necessary to conduct the company's business and include cash, account receivable, inventories, prepaid expenses, deferred tax asset, PPE, and long-term investment related to strategic acquisition. So netted from this operating asset are current operating liabilities such as accounts payable, accrued expenses, and long-term operating liabilities such as pensions and other post-retirement liabilities and deferred income tax liabilities. So these are the components of operating asset and operating liabilities. Okay, now go to the next paragraph there. Dah ada bagi tahu lagi. Non-operating asset include investment in marketable securities, non-strategic equity investment, and investment in discontinued operation prior to sale. So these are the component of non-operating. Yang tadi tu adalah operating asset. So ini adalah non-operating asset yang mana kita kena keluarkan dia daripada calculation ROE ni. So non-operating liabilities pula apa dia? So include bonds, other long-term interest-bearing liabilities, as well as the non-current portion of capitalized leases. Next, the other net financial obligation or NFO is equal to non-operating liabilities less non-operating asset. So the distinction between operating and non-operating activities is summarized in the following balance sheet here. Inilah dia. Okay, how can you calculate your NOA tadi ni yang bagi tahu contoh dia. So NOA is equivalent to your OA less your OL. And NOA also will be equivalent to your net financing. Yang mana net financing adalah net financial obligation plus your stockholders equity. So how can you calculate your net financial obligation? is equivalent to your financial liability less your financial asset. Okay, in fact, dalam textbook pun ada, you boleh tengok dekat situ. Right? So that will be RNOE. Now, next one will be your return on common equity, ROCE. So straight away go to page 469. So dia ada bagi contoh kat situ lah, illustration in 467, 468 for return on net operating asset. That one you can go through on your own. Okay, kita pergi kepada ROCE, return on common shareholders equity. So return on common equity typically excludes from invested capital all but common shareholders equity. So the return on common equity is computed as net income minus preferred dividends divide with average common shareholders equity. Tengok dekat page 470 atas sekali. Okay, so net income minus preferred dividends, okay, divided with the average common equity. Okay, how can you calculate your common equity to average common equity? So equity is the stockholders equity minus preferred stock. So for the beginning plus ending, so divide by 2. Some question, they don't provide beginning equity or ending equity. So dia cuma bagi current year equity saja. So then you can use it. Gantikan beginning plus ending bagi 2 ni dengan current equity for the year ended sahaja. Okay, kalau dia bagi 2 tahun dalam soalan, okay, last year equity and current year equity, then you can find the average figure. Tapi kalau soalan tu cuma bagi current year equity saja, then you gunakan current year equity only. Same goes to your net operating asset just now. Yang ini. So sama juga. Kalau dia bagi previous year NOE and current year NOE, then you can calculate the average NOE. Dicampurkan bahagi 2. Tapi kalau dia tak bagi, dia cuma bagi current year NOE saja, then just use current year NOE. So you will substitute lah formula yang bawah ni. Okay. Alright, now let's go to the next part in terms of analysing your return on asset. So kita dah sampai ke bahagian yang ketiga. So, tadi kita ada 4 bahagian tadi. So ini adalah bahagian yang ketiga. So analysing return on net operating asset. So return on invested capital is useful in management, evaluation, profitability analysis, and planning and control. So our use of return on invested capital for this task requires a thorough understanding of this return measure. So this is because the return measures include components with the potential to contribute to an understanding of the company performance. So this section will examine this return when invested capital is viewed from an operating standpoint, commonly referred to as return on net operating asset. So we look at the disaggregating return on net operating asset. Meaning to say kita nak pecahkan formula tersebut kepada item-item yang berkaitan dengan profit margin and asset turnover. Okay, yang mana when you want to calculate your net operating asset, besides using the original formula just now in the previous slide, kan, NOPAT or NOPAT bahagi dengan average NOA tu, we can calculate this RNOA using another formula yang mana kita boleh pecahkan dia, break this formula into 2 component which are operating profit margin and operating asset turnover. Now, let's go to the next line there. So we can disaggregating return on net operating asset. So we can disaggregate this return into meaningful component relative to sales. So this disaggregation of return on net operating asset is, so return on net operating asset equals to operating profit margin times operating asset turnover. So ini adalah formula disaggregating RNOA. So there will be a question that will require the students to disaggregate RNOA. So first of all, dia minta you calculate RNOA using the original formula. Yang inilah, yang this one. Okay, dia minta you calculate using this one. The next question, the question will ask you to disaggregate this RNOA to show the component of profit margin and asset turnover. So bila dia minta student buat macam tu, so we need to say dia kena gunakan formula yang satu lagi ni lah. Yeah, okay. Return on operating asset equals to operating profit margin times operating asset turnover. You will get the same final answer. Okay, so the main reason of this question is just they want to look at the component of the profit margin and asset turnover in RNOE. So in your textbook, you can see the formula there. So NOPAT divided by average NOE equals to profit margin, okay, which is NOPAT divided by sale times sales divided by average NOE. So apa itu profit margin? So it is measure operating profitability that relate to sales, and asset turnover adalah measure effectiveness in generating sales from operating asset. So both of these component ada komponen sale dalam dia, ada item sales dalam dia. Satu dekat bawah, satu dekat atas kan. Okay. So that will be the disaggregating lah. So the NOPAT to sales ratio is called the net operating profit margin or simply the NOPAT margin. So NOPAT margin lah yang ini. Komponen yang pertama tu, net operating profit margin ataupun NOPAT margin, and measure the company's operating profitability relative to sales. The sales to NOA relation is called the net operating asset turnover or simply NOA turnover. So inilah NOA turnover. Okay, and measure the company's effectiveness in generating sales from net operating asset. So this decomposition highlight the role of this component, both NOPAT margin and NOA turnover, in determining the return on net operating asset. So NOPAT margin and NOA turnover are useful measure that require analysis to gain insight into company's profitability. So basically NOPAT margin ni kita boleh disaggregate juga. Okay, so what we had done just now adalah first level disaggregation. Kalau you nampak dalam textbook you exhibit 8.3. Right? So that will be the first level disaggregation. Right? So normally question will ask student to first identify the RNOE using the original formula. Next, they will ask you to calculate RNOE using the first level of disaggregation. Yang inilah first level ni. Okay, so you can calculate NOPAT margin times NOA turnover. So how can you calculate your NOPAT margin? You ambil your NOPAT divided by sales. And then how can you calculate your NOA turnover? You take your sales, the same sales lah, divide by your average NOA. So you will get the same answer with the one in above. Sama. And in fact, you have another level of disaggregation that we call as second level disaggregation here. Tapi kita tak adalah sampai ke sini. Okay, so our syllabus only cover first level disaggregation sahaja. We can go through the second level also, but it consume more time lah. You boleh nampak kat sini, okay, for your own knowledge, how can they disaggregate the first level into the second level of disaggregation. So dia pecahkan lagi. So how can you calculate NOPAT or sales tolak cost? Macam mana nak calculate cost? Cost of sale plus selling plus admin expenses. And then in term of NOA. So NOA kita boleh pecahkan lagi dengan net operating working capital plus long term operating asset. So how can you calculate your working capital lah? Ada banyak lagi lah item bawah dia. And then how can you calculate your long term operating asset? Bawah ni pun ada dia punya formula. So as I said, okay, question will not touch on the second level, up to first level only. Okay, right. So that will be the first part. Now, let's look at the effect of operating leverage. Now, what is operating leverage ni? Kita tengok. So the next page 471 on the first line, and the effect of operating leverage. So net operating assets are reduced by increases in operating liabilities, thus increasing net operating asset turnover. So itu adalah effect of leverage. So bila ada wujud ni leverage, itu akan menyebabkan you punya NOA reduce. So that's why dia kata kat sini. NOA are reduced by increases in operating liabilities, thus increases net operating asset turnover. So provided that the increase in operating liabilities does not affect NOPAT, RNOA is also increased. So the operating liability effect is seen in this additive decomposition of RNOA. So dia boleh pecahkan lagi dan dia masukkan, tadi kita ada dua sahaja kan, profit margin and asset turnover. So now dia letak adanya operating liability effect kat belakang ni, which is 1 plus all left. So what is all left? All left stand for operating liabilities leverage ratio. So how can you calculate your all left? All left is operating liabilities divide with your NOE. Itu dia punya formula ni lah. So where OE is your operating asset and all left is your average operating liabilities divide with average NOE is the operating liability leverage ratio. So since all left is a positive number, increasing all left will increase RNOE. So that will be the effect. So lagi tinggi or left ni, lagi tinggi lah ROA ni. Okay, so kita nak tengok in term of dia punya leverage kalau adanya operating liabilities dalam dia punya ROA. Okay, so here dia sentuh sedikit pasal profit margin and asset turnover tadi. So dia segregate tadi lah, the second level segregation tadi. The profit margin is a function of sales and operating expenses. Turnover is also a function of sales. So kat sini dia tunjukkan lah, okay, how can they segregate the profit margin and asset turnover. Okay, now let's look at this one, profit margin and asset turnover. So the relationship between asset turnover, y-axis here, okay, and x-axis will be your profit margin. Okay, so these are the relationship between NOPAT margin, NOA turnover, and return on an operating asset. So line dia adalah curve line ni, right? So apa benda A, B, C ni semua ni, I think you can read on your own in page 473 there lah. Tak ada masalah. Okay, now kita talk about the industry. So what are the industry that fall on the curve line of this ROA curve? You boleh nampak paling dekat dia punya line tu, you boleh nampak lah coal industry, chemical industry, and then ada restaurant industry. Ada yang jauh juga macam utilities, jauh sikit lah, petroleum, or oil and gas, textile also jauh sikit daripada dia punya curve ni. Okay, so dia cuma nak menunjukkan in term of performance of the industry sahajalah. Okay, so curve ni takkan masuk dalam you punya exam, it's just a extra knowledge for you. Okay. Now let's go to the next part in term of analyzing return on asset. So ini adalah bahagian yang bahagian seterusnya. Okay, where you can disaggregate your profit margin. Ni tadi I kata tadi ni, second level disaggregation. So dia pecahkan ni punya profit margin itu. Okay, so banyak lah. So far tak ada soalan minta student disaggregate into the second level like I said just now. Okay, right. Skip this one. Ini pun sama juga. Okay, this explain about GP margin, selling expenses, and general and admin expenses. Okay, what else? Ini adalah asset turnover. Okay, tadi adalah profit margin. So ini adalah disaggregation of asset turnover pun sama. Okay, so in terms of calculation, they won't ask you to calculate this aggregation of asset turnover. Okay, up to the theory part sahajalah. So as well as you know in terms of the theory part, then they will be fine. So tak perlu sampai kepada calculation. Calculation pada RNOA and disaggregation of first level sahaja tadi. Okay, so this one I skip. Okay, ni pun sama. Okay, kita pergi kepada bahagian seterusnya, which is analyzing return on common equity. So go to page 478. Okay, now let's go to the paragraph down there. Okay, on the respective page. So analyzing return on common equity, ROCE, or simply return on common equity, is of great interest to the shareholders of the company. So creditors usually receive a fixed return on their financing. Preferred shareholders usually receive a fixed dividend. Yet common shareholders are provided no fixed or promised returns. So these shareholders have claims on the residual earnings of a company only after all other financing sources are paid. So accordingly, the return on shareholders' equity is most important to the common shareholders. So apa yang dia nak bagi tahu? So kebanyakan shareholder lah, especially the common or the ordinary shareholder, will look upon this ROCE. Berbeza dengan other claimants such as preference shares, preference shareholder ataupun creditors, because they ada fixed claim. Tak ada masalah kan, whatever happen to the business, they will get their claim. But for ordinary shareholder or common shareholders, dia cuma akan dapat apa saja yang tinggal. Kalau banyak lah, kalau sikit-sikit lah. That's why they more focusing on the ROCE. Okay, now we already know about the formula of calculating the ROCE, which is net income minus preferred dividend divided by average common equity. Now, how can we disaggregate them? Okay, so dia punya alternative disaggregation dia lah. Okay, so which is adjusted profit margin times asset turnover times leverage. Okay, so dia pecahkan kepada 3 komponen. Satu profit, satu turnover, satu lagi adalah leverage. So how can you calculate them in terms of the disaggregation just now? So for adjusted profit margin will be equivalent to the net income minus the preferred dividends divided by sales. Asset turnover will be sales divided with the average asset, and leverage will be average asset divided with the average common equity. So once you calculate them, dia akan dapat sama dengan final figure if you're using the original formula here. So dia mesti sama lah. Kalau berbeza sedikit, maybe because of the decimal places, that's all. Tapi the main answer will be equivalent. Tapi kalau you buat original formula and then you buat this aggregation pula, tapi jawapan tak sama. So that means something wrong with your formula or figure that you take into the calculation of this aggregation ROCE here. Okay, actually they have another formula. Kalau you tengok dalam textbook itu, page 479, dia ada RNOA plus in bracket LEV times spread. Okay, so kita nak tengok effect of financial leverage. So itu kita tak pakai lah. Okay, so you boleh pangkah dekat situ, formula tu dulu ada. Okay, previously, yes, on the first or the second semesters of this code, digunakan formula yang bold tu lah. ROCE equals to RNOA plus LAV times spread. But now dah tak pakai lagi, so we are using this lah, the alternative view of the ROCE. Yang inilah dia kata ni. Okay, so ini kita dah tak pakai. Alright, so we are using only this one. Okay, dia ada dua method. Sama ada ini, alternative view ataupun yang spread view ni. Okay, so yang ni dah tak pakai. Okay. Alright. So what is left? So I cerita sikit lah, left ataupun leverage tu. So the effect of financial leverage on ROE can be summarized as follow. So financial leverage increases ROE so long as the spread is positive. So simply put, if a company can earn a higher return on net operating asset, then the cost of debt that finances those assets, that the excess return accrues to the benefit of its shareholders. So all else equal, then its shareholders will be better off continuing to employ lower cost debt as the company expands than to finance the expansion with higher cost equity capital. So this is the reason untuk leverage tadi lah. Okay, like I said, so kita akan pakai benda ni untuk our calculation. So it's just extra knowledge for you. Okay, so kita ada 3 formula lah basically on how can we calculate your ROCE. So the first one adalah original formula tadi. Okay, yang ini. Formula yang kedua adalah yang disaggregation ni, alternative disaggregation here. Formula yang ketiga adalah yang ini. Okay, menggunakan left and spread. Alright. Okay, so selalunya soalan akan bagi tahu how can you calculate your ROCE, sama ada nak guna the original, alternative ataupun yang ini. Ya, tapi since I kata yang ini dah dikeluarkan, jadi maksudnya tinggal 2 sajalah. Okay, either this one, 1 ataupun yang 2 ini. Okay. Later on we will look at the example of your final exam question and we can look at how they ask you in the final exam question later on. Okay, that's all the end of this our chapter. So yang penting kita kena tahu adalah how can you calculate your NOE, RNOE, apa dasar ROI, return on invested capital dulu. Kemudian you kena tahu apa itu RNOE. So how can you calculate your RNOE? And then the formula for ROCE. Next one, in terms of disaggregation of your RNOE and the disaggregation of the ROCE. Okay. Right. So any question so far? Ada soalan nak tanya? Ada soalan nak tanya kelas? You have any question to ask?
Ada.
Boleh faham? So, saya tunjuk sikit satu soalan berkaitan chapter ini. Sekejap ya. Kita tengok last year lah. Tengok last year punya soalan. How they ask you in the question. So, this chapter will appear in question 3 selalunya. Part B, question 3 lah. For your final exam. Okay, so I share sedikit. Sekejap ya. Okay, so can you see my exam question here? So this is December 2019. Boleh nampak ah?
Boleh.
Boleh. Okay, good. So question 3, part B, December 2019. The following are the financial statement of Rumbia Berhad. So dia bagi you SOPL and SOFP for 31st December, as at 31st December 2018. Okay, so SOPL untuk December 18 and then SOFP dia bagi 2 years lah. 2017 and 2018. Fine. Okay. Next, let's look at the question. So first of all, they ask you to calculate NOPAT. Okay, so kita dah tahu kan macam mana you nak calculate NOPAT tadi. Macam nak calculate NOPAT, dia dah bagi tahu dah. Dia boleh tengoklah dekat you punya formula just now. Net operating profit after tax dekat page mana tadi? 464 tadi kan? How you can calculate your NOPAT. Net operating income after tax. Okay, so you tengok kat situ lah in term of dia punya formula. Okay, next number 2B, calculate the return on net operating asset for 2018. So use average net operating asset. Ada dah bagi tahu dah. Use average net operating asset, meaning to say you kena gunakan yang beginning campur ending divide by 2 just now yang saya cakap. Kenapa dia minta you macam tu? Sebab dia dah bagi you 2017 and 2018, both years. So that's why they ask you to calculate RNOE using the beginning plus ending divide by 2 just now. Okay, kalau dia just bagi tahun semasa which is 2018, then dia tak akan minta you guna yang ini. Dia akan minta you guna current year sajalah net operating asset tu. Tapi since dia dah provide you with 2 years of net operating asset, then you need to find the average figure. Then later on baru you calculate dia punya RNOE for 2018. Okay, so ini pun ada juga formula ada dalam textbook kan. Dekat page 466 tadi. Okay. Next, disaggregate the return on net operating asset by calculating the value of the company's operating profit margin and net operating asset turnover. So ini adalah disaggregation. Disaggregation you kena refer to textbook you lah. Disaggregation page 470 tadi. Formula yang disaggregation part. The first level disaggregation kan. So you kena tunjukkan komponen profit margin dan asset turnover dalam formula tersebut. So figure dia nanti mesti sama dengan figure dalam B. So kalau you buat C ni, amount dia, final figure dia tak sama dengan amount dalam RNOE dalam B, masalah lah. Maksudnya maybe formula yang CU ni salah. Okay, so dia mesti sama amount dia. Alright. Next D. So based on your answer in C, comment the company's operating profit margin and operating asset turnover. So this one, yang akan tadi lah, you kena tengok dia punya theory parts tu. So you kena comment. What do you think about the profit margin and what do you think about the company's asset turnover? So comment lah. And then E, calculate the ROCE for 2018, use the average common shareholder equity, SIM. So you gunakan beginning equity plus ending equity divide by 2. Why? Because they dah provide you with 2 years of equities. Okay, 2017 and 18. Next, F, disaggregate the return on common equity by calculating the value of the company's adjusted profit margin, asset turnover and leverage. So use the average asset and average common shareholder equity. Yang ini adalah komponen yang ni lah. You punya ROCE dekat page tadi tu. Page 479. The alternative view of formula tadi. Okay, adjusted profit margin times asset turnover times leverage. Kan tadi I kata disaggregation untuk ROCE ni ada 3 formula kan. The original formula dia minta dekat E. Satu lagi adalah yang ada left and spread tadi, and satu lagi ada leverage sahaja. Atau asset turnover and profit margin. So gunakan formula yang itulah, formula dekat page 479 tadi. Okay, so sama juga. The final figure must be equivalent to the answer in E. So kalau tak sama, meaning to say you punya formula tu mungkin salah lah. Okay. Next, based on your answer in F above, comment the effect of leverage on the company's return on common equity. So you comment. So what are the effect of leverage in term of the company's performance? Will it increase or decrease? Adakah dia lebih tinggi bila adanya leverage? Adakah ROCE ini akan lebih tinggi daripada RNOE ataupun lebih rendah daripada RNOE? So you tengoklah, you comment lah kat situ. Okay. Next, discuss 2 reasons for the importance of ROI as a measure of company's performance. Yang ni tadilah. The importance of ROIC tadi. Ada 3 tadi kan. measure managerial effectiveness, for apa lagi tadi, in term of profitability kan, 3 tadi itulah dekat page berapa tadi tu, you can refer to page 462. Measure managerial effectiveness, measure profitability, and measure planning and control. So dia nak 2 saja, dia ada 3 kan, so you bagi 2 saja, so discuss about it. Okay, alright, ready? So ada soalan? So you dah boleh buat lah contoh-contoh soalan final exam ni. So if you had done it, then you want me to check on your answer, then you can submit to me. Okay, so ada soalan nak tanya? Any more? Last before I close this session. Ada apa-apa soalan nak tanya? No? Alright. Kalau tak ada apa soalan nak tanya, don't forget to fill in the attendance. Okay. Okay, that's all. I think that's all for our class today. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Salam.
Thank you, sir.